Hi, everyone, and welcome to Hearing the Heart of LA, straight talk about building back. This is the second installment in our monthly conversation series created in response to the devastating wildfires that struck earlier this year. I'm Russell Brown, board chair of Friends of Residential Treasures Los Angeles. Many of you are already familiar with our organization and its mission, but after the fires, we launched a special initiative that includes this monthly series, a competition which challenges architects and designers to re-envision lost architectural treasures, and a recording of an insightful 3-hour panel discussion which took place in January at the Los Angeles Central Library. We are also pleased to announce that we'll be celebrating the design competition and its finalists at a special event on April 25th at the AIA's Center for Communities. It's not too late to enter the competition. The deadline is this coming Tuesday at noon. A heartfelt thank you to everyone who donated to support this event. Your generosity makes it possible for Fort LA as a nonprofit to continue offering free programming, resources, and initiatives like this conversation series. If you haven't donated yet, please consider supporting our work. Every contribution helps us keep these vital resources accessible to all. I'd also like to take a moment to thank all of our dedicated board members for their support and commitment. If you have questions during the webinar, please put them in the Q&A window and we will have time towards the end to respond. Thank you for joining us, and now I'd like to turn this over to our moderator, Frances Anderton.
Well, thank you very much, Russell, and good evening, everybody. I wish we could all see you out there, but we hope you make your voices heard in a little while. Really thrilled to be joined by just 3 great speakers who I will introduce in more detail in a moment. So some of you may have joined the talk that we had in February where we focused in on a different aspect of the recovery. We called it Grassroots Groups Grand Plans, and we looked then at the notion of how to sort of preserve memory as people start to move forward with rebuilding as individuals and as communities. Something that we keep hearing about, and certainly I was at a very interesting meeting put together by Will Wright at AIA LA recently. But we're hearing very much people bringing up the topic of materials as a really sort of central, fundamental dimension of building, and certainly one in which architects have a lot of expertise. Architects, builders have a lot to say. Now, why should we even consider materials in the context of the rebuild? Well, because, and please, I hope you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but we've come to see over a century of boom building in Los Angeles that a kind of pretty much of a standard building type has emerged. The wood frame constructed house, balloon frame, cheap, fast to build. Builders could build it easily. And was considered very earthquake safe of many choices. And yet what we've seen in these recent devastating fires is that very material became fuel. And indeed, the wooden embers from houses became the carriers of flame to the next house. So there has been a lot of, and in fact, I think it's Jeffrey von Oyen, who's right here, who first made that clear to me, that houses had become the fuel. Yes. So this has prompted conversation. Is it now time to actually figure out some different materials? And that could be adjusting the way we do things already, adjusting the standards, perhaps through what consider sort of smaller interventions, be it dual glazing rather than single glazing. Right through to a conversation about, should we actually think about other materials, and should it perhaps more concrete? Concrete comes up repeatedly, more steel, and perhaps a material that used to be built a lot in the Southwest, used a lot, but really has been marginalized, which is adobe, earthen masonry. So we're going to talk about materials today. We understand that materials have enormous cost implications. This is another reason why materials are right front and center here. Cost implications, climatic implications, and implications for safety, our primary topic here, fire safety, but what about earthquake safety? What about safety from rising seas? So there's so so materials bring up a, a lot of issues that we're going to try and get to some of the key ones today, and we're going to do so with the guidance of the three people that you see today on the screen. And I'm so thrilled they're joining us. Each has very, very relevant experience. First of all, Jeffrey von Oyen, he's an architect, associate professor of practice at USC School of Architecture. He designed and built a house for his brother in Malibu called the Horizon House. He will tell you more about it, but basically it was a house that he had to rebuild all over again because it was completely demolished in the Woolsey fire. And in doing so, he made all sorts of materials and systems choices that he will share. Now starting on that journey, Linnell Bryant. Linnell Bryant, who with her husband Charles runs their own architecture firm called Mass Build, which focuses a lot on affordable housing. So through that, obviously has to think about materials cost, but they own a home in Altadena, lost to the fire, and they have redesigned it, got permits, looking to get it permitted, and in redesigning have been thinking a lot about materials. They are also members of SoCal NOMA and the Altadena Rebuild Coalition, and they are working with other people in Altadena who are also now having to face these choices. So welcome, Linnell. And joining us too is someone who is really, I guess, giving voice to this material that, like I said, has been marginalized over the last decades, and that is Kay Ben Losher. He's the architect, he's an architect too, founding principal of Losher Meacham Architects, and they are based in Los Angeles and Pioneer Town. Not too many architects with an office in Pioneer Town, but anyway, there he is really engaged. In addition to building in standard ways, standard buildings, he's also very engaged with the material adobe and trying to figure out ways to enable more use of it. And there's been a bit of a mini movement going since the Palisades fire to actually see if adobe can come back in as a viable material. So welcome. And now I'm going to turn to each of you in turn to sort of tell us the story of your house and your materials, and then we'll talk a bit more amongst ourselves, and then we'll throw it to questions that Russell's going to be pulling from the chat. I think we'll just go in the order I just introduced you, really, because Jeffrey, you're now on the other side of rebuilding after a fire. So you're now you've got the wisdom of going through it all.
Yeah.
Tell us about Horizon and what that did for your thinking about materials.
Well, thank you, Francis, for the introduction. When we started out, we were doing what I thought was a very simple remodel of a ranch house from the 1960s. It started out around 2014, 2014. And it was a house for my brother, thinking about how it could be adapted from the old ranch house. We did a design that was using what the city of Malibu allowed us to do, which was 50% of the exterior wall changings, 50% of the facade, as well as the maximum 1,000 square foot addition to keep it within the coastal permitting. So it was a rather modest change on paper, but it ended up being quite substantial because we ended up having to create grade beams and caissons to support a pool and to do a bunch of other things. But one of the things that was tricky was keeping parts of the house that was the old ranch house in place, which were ventilated attics, and parts of the house that we know are very dangerous to fires. And while we did some material changes to the envelope, some of the fundamental things, again, like the ventilated attics or like the site conditions, which included creosote-soaked railroad tie, retaining walls, wood fences, bushes, all of that. I mean, this is the common stuff of LA. And the project, um, I was very pleased with it. We'd finished the house, and maybe I could just flip up a picture of it,
Mm-hmm.
if that is. Um, let's see if I can share. Are you able to see that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it, these actually weren't even professional photos, but this was the house as we'd finished it. And you can see the kind of ranch roof, which was clad. And but this is how it actually got published. Um,
I'm so sorry.
so this was the publication photo, the first one, anonymous. I learned about it from seeing the newspaper. Friends phoned and said, "Have you seen the
Oh
cover of the LA
no.
Times?" And about less than 2 weeks after the owners had moved in, they had their homeowners insurance on Halloween of 2018, and the fire was November 8th, and came through. I was there till the bitter end, uh, and then left. And of course, the fire department was so spread thin as Woolsey came over all of the Santa Monica Mountains at once, in one big line, kind of moving over to the coast. No way to defend all of the small streets, especially out in western Malibu. Um, and this is what occurred, and it was a really really tough process going through that, um, the rebuild, as we all know, is literally thousands of people know now in Los Angeles who are dealing with this problem. At that time in Woolsey, there were hundreds of people dealing with it, um, because the population was fairly sparse out again in Western Malibu where that happened. But we learned all about what that process of rebuilding would be, and the insurance process, etc. And I think as you saw in the photo I just showed, the parts of the site, some of the concrete of the foundations and the new pool and pool mechanical area, they remained. They were there, and a lot of the stuff that was inside was good to go. Um, the entire site, the fences, the road next door, the driveway, it things slumped down, burned. We had earth slump onto the driveway. The retaining walls burned, and we had to really rethink all of that and rebuild the infrastructure for the site. Um, we finished recently. I'm going to maybe share. Um, I guess I can share a screen. Um, these were just, again, hasn't been properly published yet, but was nominated for the Mies Crown Hall America's Prize. That's what these were from. But the project was rebuilt with the existing permits. And this was a tricky thing from a material standpoint. Um, the owners didn't have the funds or the time to go through and redesign the entire project. They just had this done. And as we know, prices escalated, and they ended up building through the pandemic, which was difficult in all the cost escalation. So I think for them, using the existing plans made a lot of sense, but they were, it was steel frame, wood frame construction with light wood construction as well. But we knew the foundations were good for that, including the caissons, grade beams, and all of these things that were engineered to support the house in these ways. So we built with these profiles, and we ended up using this material, but we put in a tremendous amount of fire protection in the project. All of the surfaces were metal, stucco, fire resistant things. The only place where we had a large canopy of anything like this is quite high up off the ground and over concrete in this area. These other bits of the facade where you can see are quite they are kind of sheared off and metal. We have fire sprinklers on the roof, which draw from the water. We have the ability for them to automatically switch to the pool. So the pool becomes a reservoir for 12 hours of firefighting with sprinklers both on the roof and as well on the in the landscape. We have new site retaining walls, which are concrete, and they concrete driveway and sort of layers of protection between the wildland and the neighbor before things burn and get to the house. We also got rid of all the ventilated attics, of course, with closed cell foam insulation and things that where we eliminated the possibility of these cavities that would take sparks and ignite. And we also really increased the sustainability of the project in the way with solar, both through daylight through skylights, clear stories, passive solar ventilation. And you don't see all the solar panels on the roof yet. More were placed after this. And I think as a sustainable project, really improved after the fire, but as a resilient project, in a project that had layers of defense built into it, that's what we did. Ended up creating very defensible space around the project and coded the project in a way to make it defensible without losing some of its character. We did have to widen the driveway for the fire department. And you can see that here in this photograph from above. You can see I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but the concrete walls, which are over here, remained in place as sort of a barrier where nothing is going to burn through there. Then a secondary layer of concrete driveway. Again, this is up against the wildland urban interface, which is Decker Canyon coming through here, as well as the neighbor's parcel that burned next door, and that's what ignited here. So the fire is going to be coming down the canyon from the north, and so this sort of line of defenses here, and then we have all of these surfaces which are, sparks can land on them, and it's not going to burn. We have the watering system in there as well, and of course the driveway, which is widened to 15 feet with the appropriate slope for the fire trucks to come if possible. All of the mechanical is housed in two sort of bunker-like spaces in concrete here and over here. So all of the systems for the house, including backup generation, can continue to run to drive the pumps and such without any danger of fire. So
it's become sort of fortress anti-fire, this building.
Yes, in a way, yes. And I think,
sorry, Jeffrey, to talk over you. I believe the Palisades fire didn't go as far west this time, so it wasn't tested by the fire we've just had. Is that right?
It was not. And ironically enough, it was the Franklin fire, the fire that happened a few weeks prior to the Palisades fire in downtown Malibu, that served as a fire break for this area. And as you know, Francis, from our previous conversations, I've always been an advocate for the cultural burns and the traditional approach to the management of the wildland, practiced by the Chumash in this location. But
sorry, go on.
Oh yeah, and I think that it just shows that some of these burn scars are tremendously successful at knocking the fire down and regenerating the land.
I should have said north, by the way. The fire didn't go that far north, I think. Right, I said west.
I think north. No, I think you're right on both counts. Actually, Malibu is more or less east-west there, and northwest. Yeah, you're right.
I definitely have some specific questions pertaining to this particular project, but I think we should jump to to Linnell and hear how she's tackling her rebuild, and then Ben, and then sort of circle back with some of the general points that come out of this. So, but anyway, thank you so much, Jeffrey. It's really a fascinating story, and just the way you also use system like water systems. It was materials and water systems, but then you're also talking about sort of mitigating approaches like cultural burns, which we should perhaps talk about in a bit. But Linnell, let's hear about your rebuild, and which tell us about your home and the changes that you're making, materials wise and otherwise. And I have some images if you would like me to show them. Oh, I can't hear you. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah. If you could start with what the house used to look like, that's a good starting
let me get
point.
to the house, what the house used to look like, which
So what's interesting with our home is that we were in the process of doing a remodel. So we had started drawings. This is the house the way it existed. And one of the things that's interesting to think about now is when we were doing whatever we're doing on the house, our mindset tends to be, like we were saying, sustainable natural materials, all of this. Biophilia is really key, was a very key concept for me. And so we have so much greenery and the house, and you've got plants all around the house. We had the wood, we had the brick, cinder block, just like you were talking about, Jeff. We had retaining walls made of that creosote soaked
railroad
ties, which seemed at the time very conscientious. We were reusing existing materials and things like that. But once the fire came and burned everything to the ground, I remember us coming back the day of, and there were still certain things still on fire. If you can imagine, some of the trees were still on fire. But the one thing that was so strong was the smell of that creosote in those in the retaining walls we had all over the place. And just the thought of all of this toxic chemicals and gases floating around, that left such an impact on us that, here we were thinking, on the one hand, that we were doing a great thing. And first of all, it didn't survive, which is why I could totally get you doing cement, concrete, retaining walls now, but it just understanding now the level of toxic fumes that we're releasing when we're not making good, wise choices on our materials. So now, having gone through the fire, we revisited our plans, and we have a sketch very similar, but we're changing the materials that we're planning on using. So we love the look of wood, but considering using it sparingly, but engineered treated wood that can handle fire. Cementitious fiber boards and for the drywall and for the horizontal siding instead of the wood siding like we had thought. Continuing to use the cement block, brick and stone, making sure that we have the double paned and tempered glass windows. It's very interesting because everything burned down except our patio table. And as you're driving through Altadena, it's interesting to drive through and see so many patio tables that were still sitting there perfectly fine with their tempered glass tables,
Right.
and as hot as everything was, that survived.
And that's because it's tempered. Is that because it's tempered glass?
It's interesting because some tempered glass of ours worked and some didn't. And for some reason on these patio tables, I don't know if the wind shifted and went around it or what, but it looks unscathed. And I just was amazed as I'm driving from, and I'd say, look at that person's patio table sitting there untouched and that person's patio table. So, it's just very interesting looking at that. But we're considering, of course, the fire sprinklers as we need to inside and outside, and different things like that. Uh, One thing I find fascinating, because we're also doing a lot we're a commercial firm, but we're finding a lot of obviously residential clients right now. And one of the reasons I'm not a fan of residential is because it just takes people so long to make a decision, and I don't have the temperament for that. But considering what people have gone through, they don't have the liberty and the luxury of taking forever to make a decision. So it's become an ideal client for us right now. But what I'm noticing with the clients is they're the ones that are coming to us are not necessarily wed to what was there before. People will initially say, well, the house is da da da, and then they'll remember there is no house. And so I could start and, re-envision. So some of the things that we're finding is people who want to stay and rebuild are thinking slightly larger. Almost everybody has said, I'll do the same thing, but I need an extra bathroom. I'm going to do an ADU. And sometimes they're thinking manufactured ADU or a manufactured home to start out with, and then build the actual house. But I find it fascinating that 99% say no fireplace, absolutely no fireplace. Whereas that used to be the thing, I don't know what it was that, people felt that you had to have this fireplace, although we all have central heating and air. But I'm noticing that even just for the look of it, no one seems to want that at all. They said it, it just, I think that's useless now. But I also think the fear of all these sparks, and the embers. PBS had an excellent program on Weathered. It was called Weathered Inside the LA Firestorm. And they really broke down the reasons for these fires. They defined them as conflagrations, which is an interesting word. I had to write it down. But they were explaining that the heat and the temperatures rising the way they are, and the combination with that dry, without the moisture in the air, you've got the dry climate, you have the winds, and then the ember spread is really what's to blame for these fires. And that the ability to control that in any area is an issue. So that even though we have much more timber and greenery and things like that, that something like this could happen anywhere, which was so fascinating as they spoke of that. And so one of the what the discussion was is that there's a need to build better using materials that will delay the spread and the burning with the fire. And that a lot of times people are under the impression that you can fireproof your home or building, that if you use the right materials and the right methods, that the house will not burn down. You'll hear people say, well, I had stucco and therefore my house was saved, and I sprayed this and my house was saved. And that does help to mitigate, but there were plenty of stucco homes that burned to the ground and that people don't quite get. And so there's one thing that we're trying to do is in designing now in the materials that we use, we want to create the environment where the fire spreads slower, It gives people, the residents, time to get out safely to reduce the number of lives and casualties that are impacted, but also in slowing down the fire, it gives the first responders a better handle on putting out the fires. Now, homes will still be lost, but not the number of homes that are lost. And so it's really important that as designers, we understand that and we can communicate that to our clients, that we're not trying to build, we'll never be able to build and fireproof, but we do want to reduce the risk of it spreading as fast and give people a chance to get out and get protected, you know.
Great. Nell, I'm just going to just jump in for a moment. You sort of raised a topic which is kind of a very good segue to Ben. You mentioned that people don't want fireplaces. One, fascinating. Two, it sounds like there's a little bit of even a kind of a PTSD about seeing a fireplace. And yet, when one drives around Altadena, what's standing but the chimney places, and they're made of brick. And brick is a material that we had tended to stop building with in this region. We'd moved over to wood, I guess, because of earthquake reasons. But this is I'm going to pivot to, so I'm going to pivot to Ben, because Ben, here you are now working to really, you're arguing that perhaps we need to be thinking seriously again about an earthen material. Tell us about what your sort of campaign.
Yeah, thanks, Francis. I mean, I think
Oh,
I
I'm
think
going to
that's a
stop
really
sharing. There we go.
yeah, it's a really good illustration of maybe a broader observation that we're really good at defending ourselves against the last disaster and not the next one, right? Because adobe, which I'm going to be talking about, and earthen masonry kind of more generally, is one that has had a kind of a bad reputation for its seismic performance. I think, it's always used as the illustration of, oh yeah, buildings that aren't properly designed for earthquakes, fail. And here's an adobe building, right? And that's absolutely true. But it's true for lots of different building types. Adobe buildings that aren't engineered for seismic forces perform poorly, very much in the same way that that concrete buildings, wood buildings, all that stuff, like if they don't have shear walls, if they don't have hold downs, if the roof isn't attached to the walls, bad things are going to happen in earthquakes. But adobe, our interest in it really comes from, I think, a wider assessment of risks that I think we're becoming aware of, right? The building code is something that has mostly been focused on some specific risks, right? It's like fire inside of the building, it's structural safety inside of the building. To some extent, it's interested in indoor air quality. But more and more, we're becoming aware, I think, that there are consequences to the building materials that we use, the technologies that we use in buildings, that are a lot larger than the buildings that we live in, right? So concrete construction, for example, Portland cement is some 8% of global carbon emissions. Many of the materials that are being prescribed by the California Building Code, like Chapter 7A or the California Residential Code for wildland urban interface areas, sort of depend for increasing fire resistance on high embodied carbon products. We can think of stucco, we can think of aluminum paneling, cement board, all of that kind of stuff. And it has a weird consequence that the way that we are defending ourselves against wildfires is also, helping produce emissions that are increasing their frequency and intensity. And there's obviously other things going on with global climate change and carbon emissions beyond just fires that we should be concerned about. So our work for our firm has been focused on kind of reintroducing earth as a building material that can be used in contemporary applications and engineered to function, as equivalent or outperform other more conventional structures. And I'll show a couple examples of our work, but the important thing to know is that earthen masonry, while it is perhaps not as strong, well, not perhaps, it is not as strong as concrete. It's got about 1/10 of the compressive strength of a normal concrete mix. But with the understanding that we've gained just in the last couple decades about how lower strength masonry and concrete buildings work, and I come from a practice that's really focused on a lot of upgrading of conventional unreinforced masonry buildings, adaptive reuse of warehouses for creative clients and that kind of stuff. Is like we can do this stuff safely, and it's got significant benefits, I think, in that not only is it fire resistant and it can be seismically safe, but it can be made out of locally sourced materials. They're non-toxic. In some cases, they've been shown to improve indoor air quality, absorb VOCs, which is something the Germans have sort of integrated into their code. And at the end of their lives, it's a circular material, right? It doesn't end up in a landfill. Dirt turns right back into dirt. So those are some of the reasons that we're interested in it. I'll just give you a couple quick images to show you what I'm talking about. Just give me one moment. And so here we see the media, right? This is the raw material. It literally is starting just from clay. This makes up like 11% of our mix. It's screened and lightly processed. It's mixed with water. It's poured into forms. It's dried in the sun, laid up in mortar of the same constituents. Those dry and become kind of semi-monolithic. You can see an example here. This is from Pioneer Town. And by doing this, we can create a wall system that's not only durable and sustainable, but also works really well in kind of our Mediterranean climate, and also in the desert climates where we've got big temperature swings between day and night that sort of bracket our comfort zones. So we've succeeded in getting permits. Everyone always asks, is like, well, you can't get permits for it. It's like, it's hard, but it's quite possible. This is an example of a tiny home, first tiny home in San Bernardino County. Adobe permits ready to issue on this one as a demonstration or proof of concept for a owner builder attainable workforce housing unit. This is one for a retired couple, nearly retired, I guess, 1,200 square foot compressed earth block building with a hempcrete jacket on the outside for insulation. And they're all based on around this system that instead of using rebar for reinforcing, which doesn't bond very well with earth, actually uses threaded rods. We have this post-tensioned or pre-compressed system, which is borrowed or stolen from long span, like precast concrete construction. So, and this gives you a little bit of a look at what that system looks like. It's double wall. It's got the reinforcing that goes all the way from the bond beam at the top of the wall to the footing at the bottom. And that's what holds this thing all together. So we've been talking, like a lot of our work is for clients, but but we spend a lot of our time also dealing with regulators as a function of this. So we've been talking with LA County Department of Public Works, the state of California, so the governor's office of climate, housing and community development, who write the codes, just about ways to update these long neglected codes and regulations to lower the barriers so that everybody can use this stuff if they want to, because I think it's got significant benefits for projects that have the same kind of priorities, that are interested not just in fire resistance, but also carbon beneficial construction and thermal performance.
Well, Ben, thank you so much. And what you've, I guess, exposed is there's a lot of contradictions sort of at the heart, or there's competing needs, because you could say that right now, what do we need after these fires? For most people, is to get back in their houses as quickly as possible, into buildings that are safe from fires, safe from earthquakes, to the extent possible, and obviously affordable. And as Jeffrey pointed out, when they rebuilt their house later, and Linnell can speak to this for the folks in Altadena, you build a house now on top of a site that was from years ago, and the costs are just escalating. And then there's labor costs, and of course the materials costs. So all of these things are, and then there's that very keen point that very important point you made, Ben, sort of the larger existential philosophical point, which is this one of, here we are generally sort of piling our homes with materials or building materials that may be part of the problem ultimately of the climate change that is exacerbating the fires issue that we already have. And so anyway, Jeffrey, I know you've been busily taking notes, so I know you're ready to tell us how to thread that needle.
Well, I think you hit the main points, Francis. Thank you both. Linnell and Ben, they're great hearing your stories as well. And Ben, I'd seen some of yours at USC at the conference, materials conference that we had. I think that your point, Francis, this pull between getting built back quickly and innovating in ways that create sustainable futures, and of course, the irony of using these materials that we have available and are essentially type 1 building materials, concrete and steel, reinforced concrete in particular, that would allow you to resist fire, are highly carbon intensive, kind of the opposite of doing what you're proposing, Ben. And I think there's something about that trade-off, the kind of real politics of what's happening right now when you have 10,000 houses or whatnot to rebuild. How is that going to play out? How are I think that one of the questions, the discussion we've been having a lot, I'm teaching two materials seminars at USC right now dealing with this, doing a lot of work with biocomposites and looking at a lot of the research that's happening there. And a lot of it is, like you mentioned, Ben, it's all building code related items. And it's, so what are we able to do with building codes? What are insurers going to allow and going to insure? And what is the labor force going to do that's going to allow you to do this? So where do you get the skilled trades where you can go to just about any person who builds in Southern California, and they know how to do stick frame. And the entire teams and processes are set up. Folks know how to do that. And so it's really the system of how things are made that is the essential question here. And if in fact the building codes were changed and it was viable, and then there was also an economy of doing that, I think it makes a lot of sense to move toward greener materials sooner than later. And I think everybody is in agreement, at least that I'm talking with in architecture and design and that sort of thing. So it's just a matter of making it happen.
Right. Well, the making it happen part is, I guess, where the rubber hits the road, you know,
Yes.
because I think Ben's spending years trying to make this happen. But I do want to ask Linnell, actually, you're doing your own work, your home, and you're working with several other clients, people who are rebuilding. So to Jeffrey's point about materials and whether one needs to change the building codes, or do you also, is that also a factor of the fire insurance? As in the fire, does the fire insurance, again, Jeffrey, I think this is something you drew to my attention, which is the fire insurance pays for like plus some extra square footage. Does it mean you have to rebuild with the same materials, or can you offer other materials? And does the fire insurance company have to approve those materials?
Well, that's a really good question. So the insurance, and of course, you know, this is insurance has a way of regulating, but there's an organization called the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. And what they've done is they've tested different ways, because this is made up of the insurers, and it's always in their best interest to see what, you know, what the statistics are on saving different things. So they've set up within their own organization these tests to see best practices in redesign. So they a couple of the different features that they have is, number one, that we should always have a Class A roof, and that's a given. That's code everywhere. But what they recommend in particularly fire-prone areas, but this could be anywhere, is that we build a 6-foot perimeter around our structures that is clear. And this is very different from how we design normally. And I'm kind of working with this in my head, but what they found is, if you give yourself that 60 to 72 inches clear from the building structure, and that means no greenery. You know, we normally put bushes and things directly against the building, and no furniture in those areas. They say that gives a nice enough buffer zone so that when embers are flying, they don't latch on to something that's next to the building and then set that building on fire when this catches on fire. So they found that with the Class A roof, the fire buffer zone, and then of course the required 6-inch raising off the ground, you know, off the subfloor, with a concrete base, whatever. Forgive me, I'm losing my words here. But those are the 3 components that they feel are most beneficial to mitigate fire spreading and conflagrations. But one of the things, what happens, they have a whole list, because it's a given. I mean, for us, we were close enough to the fire zone, I mean, to the hills, that we had already been dropped by our insurance company. And we were on the California Fair Plan, which is, I'm grateful to say. But what insurance companies are doing is they have their own little certification through the BHS, that if you build with these things in mind, that you're more likely to be able to be taken off of the California Fair Plan and then insured by the regular insurance companies. So for most of us, we're going to have to go with the California Fair Plan, but insurance companies are providing guidelines that they say, if you're willing to do these things, then we're willing to take a chance on insuring you, because we feel that your home is designed a little safer. But it is something that some things are common sense for us in the building trades, and other things as a design element. It's like, you know, am I willing to have that, you know, that cementitious around my house? You know, there's things to consider.
It makes it a different California experience. It's, you live in the
really
landscape,
does.
and you suddenly don't have the landscape right up close to your house.
Experience. So, you know, you can have the landscape 5 feet down away from the house, but it is a way of thinking, and something I have to talk to my clients and get them to buy into. But you know, having lost a house, I can see where they're coming from. Yeah.
And Russell has just joined us, which means that he's bringing a question.
Hi, everyone. I'm back, and we're sort of nearing the time here, but we have a question from Eric. How important are roof eaves and attic vents in the fireproofing conversation, especially considering earthen design, adobe style with flat roof and parapets?
You can all take a shot at that, I think. Which one
Yeah.
wants to go first?
I could mention something about the first part of the question, and maybe Ben wants to answer the second part with it, or whatever he prefers. But or whoever, Linnell, if you were just talking about materials as well, just a quick answer regarding these things that can burn. All of these attic spaces that we've had traditionally in the buildings are just fire traps. I mean, the embers get blown in there. It's dry kindling essentially inside of those spaces, ventilated attics, and there's so many of them. And we have a problem with those, and there's ways that you can place, certain meshes, and you can reduce the size of the embers that get inside and that sort of thing. But once you have a lot of fire pushing up against the building that ignites what's in there, so if your neighbor's house or landscape's on fire, whatever, it's going to set those on fire, and the roof will go, and the building is done. And the eaves as well, if fire, again, the heat's rising and gets trapped underneath of there, and if there's ways to reduce that, that's it's good to remove those. And of course, again, all of these things, there's a catch here, and that catch is we want sun shading in Southern California, and we want the ability to be able to go outside when it's raining, and we want coverage outside. And so that's a very it's a difficult thing. One of the things that I did on Horizon House was the largest eaves, which are low, did those with fabric canopies that move in and out, so they actually can be retracted most of the time, so you don't have the fabric out in place, but rather just the canopy frame. But there are lots of approaches to this.
And Ben, there was a specific question having to do with the flat roofs in adobe structures.
Yeah, I mean, well, adobe structures can have flat or gabled roofs or hipped or whatever. So we sort of have all the same problems as other types of construction. My preference in fire zones in Pioneer Town, is definitely one of them, is to use unvented assemblies, which is permitted in our climate zone by the California Residential Code, and it just requires you to use insulation that's impermeable, so you don't have dew point problems. I think that's the best practice for as far as venting is concerned. But I worry a lot about the roof surface itself. Like the codes prescribe Class A, which for most of us is some sort of asphaltic, shingle or something like that. But the evidence from these two fires, boy, that's like not a perfect measure. Like, because in the heat of these fires, and especially these weren't just embers that were landing on roofs, they were like, large chunks of wood and other people's homes and that kind of stuff. It just kind of melted it all the way down to the sheathing, which is crazy. So I'm a huge proponent of metal roofing. It's got a longer life as well.
All right.
Linnell,
Yeah, we were even looking at lightweight concrete for our roofing materials as well. And enclosed eaves, that's something that I've heard a lot about, because like you said, we do want the shading, but there's ways of completely enclosing the eaves so that embers and debris doesn't get caught up in it, that's easy to catch on fire, as well as mesh on all the openings that's either an 1/8 inch or smaller to protect from from things falling in there and flames going in there. And also making sure that you have a routine where you're cleaning out the gutters and things like that, because it's all that dirt and debris that's trapped in these different places that if an ember comes or something that ignite and set everything on fire that we really need to be concerned about.
I'm also interested, I'm taking Linnell with your approach toward you talked about the biophilic landscape and what you were hoping, to see. And I seen your background to it, this grass, and I'm just thinking, what is, that new vision? It's another conversation, but the material landscape around the house and what our houses are going to look like, and what the future of that is, what that aesthetic is, what that way of living in California.
I'd love to see that too. It's certainly worth a conversation we're having with some of our landscapers.
Well, definitely. I mean, Jeffrey, in a way, you sort of wrap things up very nicely here when we're just getting to 6, unfortunately, which is when we have to end. But there is this bigger question of, okay, what could our houses look like moving forward if the code gets stricter around fires, if people really do stick to that cementitious boundary around the homes? Yes, it does change it. Yes, if we get more tin roofs, if people can afford concrete, because we haven't even really gotten into those costs, but concrete's expensive. But if people could afford it, do we have more houses that are concrete with tin roofs? Are there some aesthetic changes? Certainly fires have changed the aesthetics in cities that have, dramatically changed their codes. Could we see that happen in the future? And I guess yes or no answer. Sort of, is it possible in our region, if we choose to build sort of single homes in fire, risk zones, is it possible to do them affordably, speedily, safely against fire, earthquake, rains? Can we just do all of those things, or is that just sort of a California dream?
I'm really concerned about that as well, because you see so many houses that made it through the fire, and then the rain did a number on them. And it's like, wow, I hadn't even thought about flood. I mean, I've thought about earthquake, fire, but I never thought about the damage that water can do. So you're right. I think it was Ben that mentioned we designed for the most recent episode, and we forget everything else that we should be building towards. So we're really trying to stay focused that we don't forget the earthquake, and we don't forget the flood, and we don't forget the mudslides, all when we're trying to build the fireproof home.
I don't mean to laugh, but excuse me. We should wrap. But Jeffrey or Ben, do you want to just add a final thought to that, or otherwise I'll make sure I will loudly share your company names and we'll say goodbye.
Well, I think obviously this is a complicated conversation, and we wouldn't be having it if we all had solutions, right? So I think the way forward is naturally going to be a negotiation. We're all getting pulled, in a lot of different directions, both by the qualities of the design that we want, as well as the realities of construction and bureaucracies and insurance companies and all that kind of stuff. So I think the only thing that makes me really optimistic is that people are having these conversations, right? And there's sort of a shared interest in and making information and kind of the as we all learn, we're giving it to each other.
And I think that we find also that the insurance point is a really important one, in that will we be designing to insurance if the FAIR plan is the measure of the value of the home, the max value, it will be a real luxury to build anything more valuable than what the FAIR plan will insure. And so we'll see this approach to design. I'm hearing about it now that, if you go over what the FAIR plan is going to cover, that's on you. That's all risk that you're taking on the construction. So will we see certain efficiencies? Will there be smaller approaches and in other ways saying, what can we actually insure and what do we take on? That may have an impact in these areas.
Mm-hmm. Well, and on future episodes of this, I think we'll discuss topics like density, because, you know, there's an argument for sort of densifying, bringing that, well, I won't even start that conversation now. What I will do now is do my duty and bring this call to an end for today. I want to thank K-Ben Losha with Losha Meacham Architects, based in Los Angeles and Pioneer Town, and also has an Adobe advocacy initiative called Adobe is Not Software. It's all run together. Adobe is Not Software. And Jeffrey von Oyen, Architect Associate Professor of Practice at USC, has his own firm, Jeffrey von Oyen Design. And then Linnell Bryant, who together with her husband, Charles Bryant, runs their firm Mass Build, does a lot of affordable housing along with other projects. So like I said, I hope we can get to that topic on a future one. So, and also she's very involved with the Altadena Rebuild Coalition and SoCal NOMA. And so thank you for just starting this conversation. And I hope it was useful and informative to our viewers and listeners. If any of you had questions like, and what is type 1 construction and what is class A? Because I was thinking, if, you know, just let me or Russell know, and we'll you know, reach out to the architects.
Yes, I'd just like to thank everybody for coming. Also, thank you to all of our attendees and our panelists. And also, don't forget the design competition. If you're interested in entering, you can find out more details at fortla.org. We have an amazing panel of judges. We have some great prizes. The deadline is Tuesday at noon. And please tune in for the next edition of Straight Talk about building back, which we will bring to you at the end of April. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you
Thanks
very
all.
much. Good chatting with you all.